The short version is just say no. I don't go into the school and say, I don't want this. No, not just a wee second. I don't want this taught to my children. And just say no. That is your right. So that's the short version. Be sure and clear that that is your right. The longer version is coming up, and my hope is to give you some evidence and some facts to support you and give you confidence in saying no if you need it. I'm also going to end with a rundown of what your rights are and what you might do to enforce them, which is the general tenor of all that you have said. Know your rights and then enforce them, and how do you enforce them? And that's the theme here. I'm familiar with Bonhoeffer, I'm sure, and he's the opening slide. Please. Good, now you can't see me, that's much better. So, the who were mentioned, or the who was mentioned, and I'll be referring to them quite a lot through this. Anything that you see from the who is a direct lift from their documents. Again, I'm going to highlight their documents. And it is an unscientific belief. We've heard a lot about scientifically accurate. Well, actually, it's out of date science and it's not accurate. And if you need it, I'm going to present the scientifically accurate version of it. And it is being pushed as a fact, as if it was undisputed. It's very much disputed. And as you said, our children are being bombarded with ludicrous concepts, namely that a person can change their God-given gender. I am at a loss to understand why it's in primary schools at all. Actually, because there's no legislation that says it should be. Be very clear on that. It's not directed at primary schools. So I am aware that many primary schools are following the WHO guidance. The next one emphasises where your worry there. Pupils are required to rethink all that we considered a basis about marriage, parenthood, boy, girl, woman. It's all being challenged now. And as you said, this is not about teaching understanding, it's about indoctrination and a promotion of an ideology which I would imagine very few parents, let alone Christian parents, would subscribe to. So that's the first proposition. The second one is again what you've been saying as you walked around the room. And we are in danger of instituting an RSE programme or a national grooming programme through the school curriculum. And it's about cutting off your influence. You've already spoken about that, about taking back parental power, haven't you? Mm-hmm. Well, there are mechanisms that appear to me to be removing the impact of parents. Northern Ireland is actually an unfortunate situation, as I will demonstrate as we go through this. Not the same as Scotland, England, or Wales. And I'm going to point out the legal position as we walk through this.
So why did you say fortunate or unfortunate? Fortunate.
Well, I said fortunate, and you'll see why in a moment. So, there are the aims, as you can see, to give you some facts to use and explain how the process works. I do think you need to know how the process works, because it's, as you pointed out, it's a big morass out there. Who do you contact? Who's in charge of the school? Board of Governors, the church, the Education Authority, the Department of Education, CCMS. Who's actually in charge of our schools? I'm going to prompt you to ask questions, I hope, to find out what is being taught to your child in your school. You're entitled to know. Be certain about that. What is being taught? You're entitled to know because you're entitled to the curriculum. So you're entitled to know. So I'm going to mention a bit about how we got here. the changing culture, the world we live in. How did we get here, and how is it going into schools? How is it getting there? Then I'm going to end with parental rights and suggest what you can do. I think the top 3 or 4 are important because it adds context to how we got here. So, that's the same thing in a different way. How did we get here? What is the culture? How does it get into schools? What exactly are we talking about? What are you opposing? What evidence is the government using? And what might you say to it? What are our own authorities saying? All of them. What are your rights and what can you do? I've said that already. So, the world context you've mentioned, he who pays the piper, you know the saying. It's not clear whether it started with a WHO, but the world agenda is with the World Health Organization. The UN adopted the World Health Organization's curriculum and ethos, passed it to the European Union, then it went to the UK Parliament, which signed up to it. Education, though, is a devolved matter in Northern Ireland. It's like health, actually. So education is devolved to Stormont. But in the absence of a devolved administration, the power lay with the Secretary of State. The Secretary of State enacted this because he said Northern Ireland's not doing it, so I'm telling you to do it. However, in the small print, he did give what I would call power to the parents and power to the schools. And if you read Hansard, or ask Sammy Wilson, because he was there, and I've read the Hansard version, I'm going to use some of it here, but if you read my other articles, it quotes it directly. It's what I call the small print, and it gives the power to you. So it goes from the Secretary of State. In the absence of a minister, it went directly to the Department of Education. That's a civil servant. That would be the permanent secretary. And from there, it goes to SEA. That's, I'm sure you're fading over already. SEA is our curriculum council, which writes the guidance. It's currently involved in the exam process. As you know, the exam results, GCSEs are out this week. A-levels were last week. Curriculum and Examinations Council. All right, that's what the C and the E stand for. So they write the guidance. The guidance goes on the website and into schools. They are commissioned by the civil servants. In theory, the civil servants follow the direction of the minister. The minister directs the civil servants. In Northern Ireland, the civil servants have got used to run the country. But the minister has already said he doesn't think this should be taught in schools. Now, he should say it louder. Now, that's the process. You know about the culture and ideology. Anybody watching the opening ceremony to the Olympic Games will know about that. But the top line about the NHS, certainly in England, asking men before they exit, before they pray, you know.
What's here too?
Pardon?
It's here too.
No doubt, it's a policy.
In the Ulster Hospital.
So this is the culture and ideology that's pervading our society. It's a moot point whether the schools spread it or whether society spreads it, but it's being spread. There are loads of articles, and I'm putting this one up because it's something to look out for, that many schools are adopting gender-neutral uniforms or toilets or names or whatever. These are English examples, but that's what you need to keep a lookout for here because it's an early warning sign, isn't it? So I just include the top one because I was in disbelief. Home Office guidelines urge protection for civil servants whose gender may vary regularly. Excuse me. And the rest you can read there about the numbers of genders. But I'm talking about culture and the spread of an ideology. and you see it's macro on the large scale, and then into schools. I will be advising you to find out, to ask what's in the school library, indeed what's in the public library. An FOI if necessary, that's freedom of information. Are these books in your library? And of course, some of you are familiar with it. I'm going to flash past it because it's disturbing. And then on to other, as you see, that's this year, Telegraph, menu of sexual preferences, select your gender. So into schools, and I hope that's legible. So that's the culture, and how does it get into schools? Well, as you can see from that, and particularly referred to the red, and on the second line, schools should increase the visibility of transgender young people by supporting pupils in setting up a gender and sexual orientation alliance or introducing transgender role models. Excuse me? Now, that goes well beyond informing. That is promoting, in my view. Now, that's on the Department of Education's website. The Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission, which is being used here, and I must point out, it is supposed to be for post-11 children. That bit's left out whenever you see the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission referenced. But they say, look, schools must go further in promoting gender diversity, meaning acceptance of the idea that children can swap gender or belong to some new gender. So that together with the CEDAW that you mentioned about women's rights, which is code for abortion, although it is only one of about 7 or 8 recommendations that CEDAW actually made, and it's number 7. So it wasn't at the top. But that's the evidence that's being quoted. But remember, the Human Rights Commission is post-11, but that's not mentioned. So, SEA, the SEA guidance, there's that word, proactive in establishing links with local agencies, Cara, and you've referenced those. Now, there has been success in the RSE hub, SEA. I don't know if you've been on it recently, but it is considerably less offensive than it used to be. Cara remains on it, but there are a lot of other material that's been removed. But it's still a battle in progress, shall I say. The EA manages schools, and like many things, if something goes wrong, the EA is responsible, and the EA says the department's responsible, but EA just quotes it. They've got a whole suite of materials. Now, the relevance is, this is where Board of Governors, school principals, and people that manage schools, this is where they go for their advice. So, although this is terribly technical, in a sense, it's nonetheless where the people who manage schools start. That and the WHO guidance. If you want to know what should be taught, you go to the WHO guidance. So, you mentioned the teacher. Of course the teacher's important. Otherwise, why have a teacher? But the research shows, the research shows those two things. What you already know, young children want to please teacher. We all did. We wanted to get good mark, we wanted to get well done, and so on and so forth. So what the teacher says is kind of important in setting up the atmosphere. And the second is research-based, 30%. So therefore, if a teacher's saying 2 + 2 = 5 and saying it over and over and over again, that's what the child's going to know, because that's the business the teachers are in. Repeat, repeat, repeat. And if the repetition is based on swapping genders, or if you don't like being a boy today, be a girl tomorrow, if that is repeated in voice or in signage or in culture, and of course you are familiar with the dangers. So, training the teachers into, that's the Irish National Teachers Organisation, are very influential. This is their training video. Again, read the red. Teachers should change their language and lessons to make them gender non-conforming inclusive. And then the other bit in red. School teachers, the course helps primary school teachers. They be prepared to challenge attitudes, introduce transgenderism to junior infants, and get children to challenge their own beliefs on issues around gender, as Mervyn was saying. It offers advice on social transitioning. There's no business in the school. And encourage debate about whether boys and girls should wear clothes. Mervyn's referred to that. It further develops the theme that transgender children find happiness when living as their true selves. Now, I'm going to present evidence that contradicts that, because that's the underpinning justification for a lot of this. That statement there, one up from the bottom. And I'm going to present the evidence which debunks that. So, what are we talking about? What is so wrong? I suspect many have seen this before. Well, sorry, that's the question. Who decides? The who, the state, or you? You all know the answer to that. And those two statements represent the World Health Organization's approach to gender and sexual education. And I'm reading them out because I'm aware that not everybody can see them. The WHO responds to contemporary global challenges through education with a special focus on gender equality. And secondly, sexual education is firmly based on self-determination and the acceptance of diversity. Self-determination. And then on sexual education, sexuality education, a child is understood to be a sexual being from the beginning. Now, this is a culture and ideology with which very few ordinary people would subscribe to, but this is the start of it. This is where it starts and feeds down. The next statement is in the small print. Sexuality should be delivered in an interactive way. I'm at a loss to understand how you can identify genitalia, for example, without being interactive. And interactive can start with, shall I say, pictures or photographs or screenshots, and walk along where. Now, that's the basis of everything that follows, because that's the international technical guidance written by WHO. WHO wrote 2 documents. You have no substitute for reading it, like it's paint drying time. However, I suspect you would spend a lot of time buying a new car or a new house or investigating a holiday. This is the health of your child here. The 2 documents that they've written, that's one. That's the second one. They're basically the same. They say the same thing. Age difference is slight. One starts at 5, the other starts at 6. Does it really matter? This is 6 to 9. Sexual intercourse, gender orientation, sexual behaviour of young people, masturbation, self-stimulation, orgasm, differences between gender identity and biological sex to a 6-year-old. 9 to 12, it goes further. Coming out. Gender identity and sexual orientation. There's it all again. So the GTE, by the way, was part of another presentation. Get them early.
I think it starts at age 4 here.
Yes.
And most of the stuff does actually start at age 4.
Okay. So just moving on, this is the 9 to 12-year-olds. What sexually explicit media, pornography and sex tech? Now, how do you do that without pictures or web pages? Yes, or homeworks. Yes, indeed. And 5 to 8-year-olds. Charlene's telling me 4, but the booklet I read it said 5. But anyway, you'll be checking it yourselves. I'm using it. Define gender. Describe how they differ. Reflect on how they feel about their biology. What? A 5-year-old, 6-year-old going into school and saying, I'm not sure whether I'm a boy or a girl today. Miss. This is somebody that won't put up their hand and say, I don't understand how you get 6 when you multiply 2 by 3. They're going to say, and you say, recognise that being curious about one's genitalia, genitals, is normal. So, what is the government saying and their evidence? To a certain degree, it started with a thing called the Dutch Protocol. And the next page deals with the Dutch Protocol, but essentially it came about when there was certain psychiatrists began to say children are in the wrong body, and unhappy children got offered advice based on scientific evidence that you're unhappy, you're very unhappy, you're very emotionally disturbed. It must be because you're in the wrong body. And that developed into the Dutch Protocol, which was to do with puberty blockers and surgery. And it was called the Dutch Protocol. Our own government, now it's important because I'm going to mention it again in the next. Our own government was talking about unwanted pregnancies. That's what the Secretary of State introduced this because the high number of unwanted pregnancies in Northern Ireland. That's his justification. Now, I'm not clear what's that got to do with LGBTU transgenderism. And unwanted pregnancy suggests, for example, abortion. But nowhere at the moment does it say about the illegality of all this. Like, to have sex with a minor is a criminal offence. That should be one of the lead things as a reminder on, for example, say his website, on the department's website, or wherever. The illegality of what we're talking about here. We mentioned these two, and there's it again. Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission and CEDAW, those are the two things quoted by the Department of Education. Now, so this is the Dutch protocol, and it was pioneered by a Finnish doctor called Kaltiali. As I've just said, transitioning leads to a healthier, happier, more fulfilled life for children who may be confused about their gender. So change gender. How do you do it? Puberty blockers and surgery. So, what happened next with this doctor? The bit that's forgotten about. She changed her mind because she got a hold of the real evidence, which, as you can see, she termed outright fraudulent statements about the evidence. She found the evidence was flawed.
Who is the she?
Dr. Kaltiali.
Oh, sorry.
She introduced the Dutch Protocol, okay? But it was based on what she later discovered was flawed evidence. And it's where we got a lot of the puberty blockers and all that from. Now, what does the evidence actually show? Well, you're all familiar with the CAS report. And the CAS report fundamentally says there are 3 or 4 pages of evidence here, and I'm showing the 3 or 4 pages plus a summary to let you see that the evidence exists. Not that you're supposed to know it all right now, but to let you see that the evidence is actually there. Look, 80 to 90% of children who suffer gender dysphoria change their minds because they're going through a transient phase. Her words, not mine. A transient phase. Now, the CAS report was done for the NHS. This is the NHS that we all believed with COVID policies, or we all didn't believe. But what happened now. So as you can see, the guidelines recommended clinical management approach. No surgery, no puberty blockers. Now that's a very strong argument in my view. And I'm certainly making it in other places. And then it goes on to say, the blatantly obvious, you referred to it. She says, allowing children to socially have significant effects on the child or young person in terms of their psychological function, and better information was needed about their outcomes. I should say, before you surgically operate on one of my children, better information is needed about their outcomes because they don't have the information. It goes on to say the evidence is weak. Don't have any. But the CAS report is fundamental. So the same NHS report, as I said, due to gaps in the evidence base. The evidence was flawed due to gaps in the evidence base. But the CAS report is the one that, in my view, you need to learn. You need to be confident that that's what the NHS guidelines are saying. Clinical management approach, not medical or pharmaceutical. But remember, you are not initially dealing with the NHS. You're dealing with civil servants and government and your politicians. It would be helpful, of course, I realise that. We'll move on then. This is the Finnish national. Now remember, Caltielli was Finnish. This is the Finnish National Health Service. It's called COHER. And it concluded that studies touting the success of gender-affirming model were biased and unreliable. You know there's been a lot of talk. Your child goes into school and says, I'm a boy today, you can't say anything about it. Gender-affirming. They've concluded that the evidence was unreliable. And then it goes on to say, the report warned that young people whose brains were still maturing, several of you said that, lacked the ability to properly assess the consequences of making decisions that have to live with the rest of their lives. That's what they say. So it goes on to make other very clear statements, such as transgender transition should be postponed until adulthood. So this concept of schools in some way facilitating or leaning towards socially transitioning, it's just, well, you know it's wrong. Look, the third paragraph, every systematic review of the evidence to date has found evidence for mental health benefits of hormonal interventions for minors to be of low or very low certainty. Every single review has found the evidence for what they're doing or talking about doing non-existent, really. So, the same is true of America. Significant gaps in the research. This is Professor McHugh. Affirming children in the false gender can cause real damage. And as you see around the bottom, he gets his numbers mixed up, but will settle for 80 to 90% of children grow out of it, to use the time-honoured phrase. I'll rattle on here. It is right to say that the countries that let us in are now leading us out, except Northern Ireland slow, so we're still going down that way, while these others are going up in the whole list of them. This research shows that children who are undergoing gender dysphoria are doing so for two reasons, two big reasons. A trauma in their lives, something big has happened in their lives, or secondly, peer pressure. And that's, of course, what we don't want in schools.
Excuse me, do you remember?
So, remember, it was to give children more happier lives, more fulfilling lives. Well, the evidence is the reverse, actually. The suicide rate's 2 to 4 times the rate of heterosexual. So it's not true. And really, it isn't true, because it doesn't work anyway. instead of there being a decrease in those tendencies, there's an increase, as you can see. So, there's a summary of the evidence, and quite clear. That's a bit I certainly try to remember, if you like. Yes, it is to do with it is to do with grooming. I'm explaining the vehicle through which it's being done, and that's the track. It all does sound, as you say, very worthy, and it comes in. Believe it or not, it comes in under safeguarding, and of course, it's a total reverse of safeguarding. So, what I want to move on to now are rights, because many of you may well have come here to just to explore your rights. So that's a bit I'm going to go on to now. But the non-government organisations can only operate through the processes. They can only, and in fact, the WHO is using education to push its own ideology and culture. It's yes, they're pushing it through. The education has become the strategy through which WHO pursues its agenda. And now we could talk endlessly about all that. Now, but it's still where you're at, I believe, is we still have to be challenging it with the authorities that we can access. And we can access the people who are driving it here. Because these people live amongst us. They're in the local offices. And these are the people that you can influence. For example, a child at school costs between £3,000 and £4,000. 4 children withdrawing from a school as a teacher's salary. A principal will be cognizant of that. So one family withdrawing from a school 1 year, that's a family of 4, you're talking £15,000, £16,000 per year. Over the lifetime of a school, that's £80,000. Now, that hurts if you're trying to balance a school budget. So that is actually one of the things, one of the powers that you need to know you have. Because most school budgets are on a knife edge. And if somebody comes to me and says, I'm taking my entire family out, Mr. McCarthy, and here's why, I'm going to have to say, now, what's that costing? I'm doing this in my head. I'm not saying it to you. I'm doing it in my head. And hold on a minute. I'm going to have to lay off 2 teachers to do it. So that is part of your power and part of the purpose of me sitting here, to just go through what your rights and what your powers are. And then you pick the one that is suitable for you. So, your power derives from the Education Reform Order in 1989. It's quite clear. And I'm going to articulate a couple of clear points very soon. Okay? And I'm really finished. All right? It's the Education Reform Order. The Board of Governors are in charge of the curriculum of your school. The ethos of the school is paramount. The Board of Governors prepares the curriculum policy. It must be consulted. It must be passed through the parents. No ifs, ands and buts. That is the law. Now, it's not been shouted from the hills. But if you read the documentation carefully, whether it's Hansard, the Department of Education, SEA or Education Authority, it all says this. Be no doubt, I'm going to quote it here in a moment to give you the extra confidence of knowing that that's what it says. So does the WHO. The WHO actually uses the phrase, one size doesn't fit all, because it goes on to say it must take account of culture, religion, and the social norms of the society. Now, that means what it says. It must take account. A successful program needs the support and engagement of the parents. A successful program needs trained teachers. That's in the small print. But it's there in those documents. Nowhere, except for who, does it specify the age. We kept on going on as, oh, it's primary school. I have been unable to find anywhere except for who that specifies the age. So why are we doing it in primary schools at all? Nowhere does it specify exactly what should be taught. That's at the direction of the school. Now, as the teachers here will know, the mention of gender diversity is a mention. It's not being taught. It may be a mention. You may be opposed to that. But it's as long as a piece of string. Now, that's in the WHO document. So it is important to know this last paragraph. Faith-based organisations can provide guidance to programme developers and providers on how to approach. Now, Northern Ireland remains, at least amongst its people, conservative with a small c. Our schools are, and I'll come to that, I'll pause there because I need to make it later on. This happens to be the Presbyterian view. The Presbyterian Church has published a policy document called Transgender. And it speaks about mental health in the second paragraph. But it does, I suspect, articulate rather well many of your views. The distinction between the sexes is increasingly being undermined, especially in schools, where the concept of gender fluidity is often promoted. And then Vaughan Roberts is actually the author. We will always be insecure if our identity is based on something within us. Identities in Christ. You know this. But that's what the Presbyterian Church is saying to Presbyterian ministers. Now, there are Presbyterian ministers sit on the Controlled School Support Council. His name is Andrew Brown.
We've come across.
Yes. Now, he represents the Presbyterian Church. Mm-hmm. Now, remember, there are Presbyterian ministers with strong views on this. Mm-hmm. There's a Presbyterian representative in, I believe, every state, every controlled school, we'll call them state school, in the country. And there's a Church of Ireland one, and there's a Methodist one. Find out who they are. Pay them a visit. So, every school board of governors in the country has church representatives and parent representatives. Everyone. Okay? So, just a quick look to give you confidence about your rights. The Secretary of State. Look, it is at the school's discretion to implement the contents of the curriculum according to its values and ethos. A school's RSE policy should be subject to consultation with parents and endorsed by the school's Board of Governors. So, the next time you're in a school, you can ask, was the policy endorsed by the Board of Governors? What is the RSE policy? Could I have a copy, please? Was it consulted amongst the parents? And ethos, all the controlled schools, 90% of them have signed up to the ethos of the controlled sector. The word Christian is in it. I know because I prepared it. The word Christian is in it. All the Catholic schools, or most of them, are signed up to CCMS, and there's a clue in the title. A Catholic ethos. They are ignoring it all, but they should be reminded of it.
Correct.
So, this is what the Department of Education say, just to give you the confidence. The regulations also make provision for, at the request of a parent, a pupil to be excused from RSE lessons. That means you have a right to know when they are and what's in them. Next. Oh, same, DE. All grant-aided, it just says the same thing. All grant-aided schools are required to have an RSE policy based on the ethos of their school, subject to consultation. That's on the Department of Education's website. The Education Authority reiterates it. So there's no doubt about any of this. The doubt comes because they're not telling you. SEA, the curriculum, says the same thing. Schools should consult closely with parents or carers. Section 3.1, withdrawal from Relationships and Sexuality Education, it says, Northern Ireland parents have the right to have their child educated according to their wishes. That's a direct lift. But if you're not going to use these things, this is your power. The Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission actually says decisions about whether and how to make provision falls to individual schools, Mr. Principal. Now, I worked in Portadown and I didn't find parents terribly reluctant to tell me what they thought of my policies. So that's it in black and white. Decisions about whether and how to make provision falls to individual schools. Okay, so your rights. And then what you do about them. I'm pretty much at the end. Be consulted, this is a summary. Be consulted with respect to the curriculum. Withdraw your child from the class. That means you've got to get the curriculum and know when it's to be taught. I mean, teachers will know that you have your lesson notes and lesson plans and yearly plan roughly broken down into months. So I'm dealing with this topic in Ohm's Law. I'm dealing with Ohm's Law in October. Here's what I'm teaching in Ohm's Law. Here's what I'm doing. I mean, that's what teachers should have, and maybe the schemes of work should be in the principal's office. So the principal should know. You should know who's on the Board of Governors. You have a right to find out. Phone the school. You have a right to know who is on your Board of Governors and where they came from. My Board of Governors had 4 church reps because often the school which transferred this is to do with history. The church which transferred its buildings to the state had the majority. So 2 White Abbey, 2 Presbyterians, 1 Church of Ireland, 1 Methodist. The number of parents depend on the size of the school. We had 4. So 4 plus 4, there's a clue in their title. Parent representatives. Represent the parents. You are entitled to sit on a Board of Governors as a parent rep and as a teacher rep, incidentally. As you know, 2 teachers sit on the Board of Governors. Now, I happen to feel you're pushing at an open door here. I must say, the way, at least in the control sector, the way our employment processes work. I did think it operated in the Catholic sector too, but you were telling me differently. The way our processes work is that there are a lot of church-facing appointees. And my own Board of Governors, every single one of 15 had a connection with the school. Either as a grandparent or a former pupil. These are local people to enact local views. That's why local management of schools was established in 1989 under the Thatcher Revolution, to make schools locally accountable. So, make representation to Board of Governors. You may even go and see them or see a subcommittee. I had parents see subcommittees, for example. You write to the Board of Governors, you write to the Secretary of the Board of Governors. That means it must be brought up at the Board of Governors. That means you must get a reply.
Can I just say, isn't the Secretary of the Board of Governors usually the principal?
The Secretary of the Board of Governors is the principal, but it goes into the office. Now, you will also write to the principal. It is true that the Secretary of Board of Governors is often the principal. But in my experience, principals automatically take that to the Board of Governors because he acts as Secretary. The principal doesn't have a vote on the Board of Governors, believe it or not. So he is, as its name suggests, the secretary and the advisor to the Board of Governors. But that letter, any letters that came to me, I handed over to the chair. And all my colleagues did likewise. You have, as is pointed out, the right to educate your child at home. So, and what you were talking about there, that is the Alliance manifesto. And they were promoting the removal of parent rights. Now, the removal of parent rights is because the parents, 74% of you, opposed this. So, okay, you were opposing it, so get rid of the parents. Some of us remember the 74%. Okay? But this is dangerous. That's in their manifesto. So that's a kind of commitment. So you would need to, if you don't mind me saying, so find out what your politicians are saying. Now remember, our governors, unlike English, Scots and Welsh, don't have political appointees. Now they may have politicians sitting on them. I'm not talking about the voluntary governors now, I'm talking about the others. They're not there as a political representative if they are sitting there. Okay? So, even if you agree with the programme, now remember you're principally dealing with amendments to the RSE programme. Not all of you agree with what I'm about to say, so I am aware of that. But it's principally amendments. You want a bespoke curriculum for Northern Ireland and a bespoke one for your school. Rather than saying no, which we're pretty good at in Northern Ireland, all right? What you should say, right, this is what you would like. A bespoke curriculum for Northern Ireland, or whatever word you choose to use, and a policy for your school directed at you, that cohort. Now, I don't think this is any place in school. We can hardly teach them how to read, write and count. And we're not spending enough time doing that. We're spending a lot of time doing this. And a class of 30 certainly isn't the right place. I mean, what are we doing? A class of 30 we're going to discuss. Please note, a lot of schools are adopting the head in the sand. There's no question, because it's coming. It's under the view that this will never happen, but it's been snuck in sort of thing, you know, and the inspectorate are going to take a look at it and what have you. I'm telling you your rights. What you do with them is different for everybody sitting in this room. I know what I can do and I'm doing it, but these are your rights. So your actions.
Could you explain to us the power of the inspectorate into schools on this?
Well, the inspectorate also recommended that schools should be doing more to promote this. So they are supposed to be looking at, not looking for, but they don't, they look for. And that's, the chair of the Board of Governors has a lot of power. He has the final power. A confident believer, the chair of the Board of Governors is fundamental here, because the chair can say, it's our policy. I've been there. The chair is very powerful. Naturally, the principal would be good. It would be very helpful if you persuaded the principal. In my experience, the teachers I have experience of don't want this. They are allies waiting to be allied to something, in my view. Certainly within the greater Portadown area, with which I'm very familiar. It's pushing at an open door. I can't speak about your individual experiences. Of course I can't. Your local school. But the teachers in the area that I was familiar with need support, need help, and they need the parents to say no. And parent power is often underestimated. So, actions. This is what some of you wanted to know. It is different for different people. And I realise that sometimes going into the principal's office has a history for many of you. Some of us don't bite. It would be good if there are 2 or 3 of you went in together to give your views. These are our views, and we do not want our children. And you say it sincerely, and here is why. If you want to say why, you're entitled to say no without any of this. We are spiritually opposed to it. But if you don't tell them, they're not going to know. That's the first thing. Find out who the parent reps are and tell them. Again, if you don't tell them they're getting all this stuff in the media, what other voices are they hearing? They're hearing all this. They might be hearing a wee voice of their own conscience, but who am I? You've got to give them the weight of the other side of this. Speak to your MLA. I mean, MLA, some of them are elected on a very tiny minority. Very tiny minority. And your local councillors too. Now, they've no direct power, but they do have influence. Some of the local councillors were elected on 10 or 12 votes. So they'll not know your opinion unless you tell them. Make an appointment. Go in and tell them and ask them and discuss it with them. Email if you want, make a phone call if you want, but sitting there. I think it is very challenging for parents who either haven't the capacity or the ability or the resources. I think my own view is for the benefit of all of the children. From where I sit, we've got to try to amend the system. That's where I'm at, and that's what I'm doing. Because that benefits all of the children who can't be homeschooled. They've got to go somewhere. So this is the battle that I'm trying to fight. You could ask for books in the library. I've certainly been asked for books in the library, and it doesn't mean you'll get them. But you can ask for what books on this subject are in your library, or I've heard this is in your library. Because children have a library period in many schools. So you're entitled to know. It's supposed to support the curriculum. So
who authorises these books coming into the libraries in the school?
Well, there's a library service.
Yes, but someone must authorise what books the library service.
Well, many schools have a librarian. And the librarian would choose the books with maybe the head of English or whoever was the teacher in charge of the library. And they would do so from, there's a library van, at least there was when I was, a library van that came around the school. This is an ongoing battle against something that's invisible up there. I know that. I'm not saying any of this is easy. I'm merely saying this gives you some tools to fight with. Ask for the curriculum policy. If there's an RSE being taught, there's got to be a curriculum policy. Has to be. And that policy should go through the Board of Governors and should be minuted as such in the Board of Governors minutes and should be out the consultation with you, the parent. Now, you can say, look, I want this all delayed until this is done. I want to see that you can't teach this until it's in your curriculum policy. And you can't teach it until the Board of Governors has signed it off. And the Board of Governors can't sign it off until it's consulted with the parents. Now, this is, I feel like I'm sitting over there. It's happened to me as a principal. You're screaming at it, but this is the process laid down to make schools locally accountable. The next business, you mentioned those specialists. I would ask the school what external self-appointed specialists, experts, are being used, and has the school monitored them? Because they haven't. Either the governors should monitor them before they go into school, or the principal should monitor them when they're in the school. Because Cara comes in under bullying.
Under who?
Under the anti-bullying.
Oh, yes, right.
But it's nonsense.
Cara is full term for the video.
It's what?
Cara Friend.
Yes.
The full term for the video.
Okay, sorry, Cara Friends, yes. And what I'm saying is the school should be monitoring these external providers. Shouldn't just say give them a free hand. Listen, I know that what I'm saying here is not easy. I know this, but you wouldn't be here and you wouldn't have me here if it was easy. It would be, I mean, I'm not finding it easy. And I know the rules. But as that says, if not now, when? I've given you your rights, and that's where you are, isn't it? Be strong and let your heart take courage. That's the psalm. And of course, the world will not be destroyed by those who do evil, but it will be destroyed by those who watch and do nothing. And as I said, as Lorraine knows, been fighting this for a long time, and if it had been that easy, I'd have won up by now. However, a group of parents, and I urge you to try to get a group of parents, because a group of parents can make a big difference, either financially, or they can give strength to the principal. Pretty much every principal that I knew went to church or chapel on a Sunday. And they weren't paying lip service to their faith. They weren't. But they do need, in my view, they need your support, written and verbal support, in doing this. Because they will be looking to, we are all used to a hierarchy. The hierarchy for a principal and board of governors is the Education Authority, the Department of Education, ETI and SIA. But they need your strength to counterbalance that. And this gives them the tools if they don't have them. Thank you, that's me. The guidance hasn't yet been written. Hasn't yet been written, so we're still in this game. It's not a game, but we're still on the field. The guidance has not been written, and primary schools, I'll use the word, should not be using this guidance. I see no reason. I'd be asking, why are you doing this at all? To see what the answer is, and then bring the answer back. And well, I read a Substack called Hugh's newsletter, and articles and broadcasts like this are on the Substack. It's free. You have to subscribe, but it is free.